The chandeliers glittered above the polished mahogany tables of La Lumière, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, casting a warm glow over the clinking glasses and murmured conversations. It was October, and the city was alive with the crisp energy of fall, the leaves outside painting the streets in hues of amber and crimson. Tonight was our 5th wedding anniversary, a milestone I'd once dreamed would mark a turning point in my marriage to Nathan Caldwell. I, Elise Harper, sat across from him in a sapphire blue dress he'd given me for my 32nd birthday, its silk fabric clinging softly to my skin. He'd said it made my eyes sparkle like Lake Michigan on a summer day, and I'd clung to that compliment, hoping it meant he still saw me. But as the waiter poured our Pinot Noir, Nathan's hand struck my cheek with a force that silenced the room, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. 5 years of shrinking myself to fit his world, and this was how he chose to celebrate. Here's the thing about underestimating your wife. The quiet ones, the ones you think you've tamed, are often the ones who've been weaving their plans, in the shadows far longer than you'd ever imagine. Love, they say, is a choice. But for me, it had become a habit, one I hadn't realized was eroding my very sense of self until it was almost too late. I'd spent 5 years as Nathan's perfect partner, the poised, supportive wife who stood by his side at corporate galas, charity events, and client dinners. His colleagues at Caldwell and Pierce, the prestigious law firm where he was a rising star, would smile and murmur about how lucky he was to have such a grounded wife. Grounded. That word followed me like a shadow. Elise, who never complained when Nathan canceled our weekend plans for a late-night deposition. Elise, who smiled politely when he made unilateral decisions about our finances, our home, our future. Elise, who had learned to make herself smaller, and smaller until she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. I hadn't always been this way. Before Nathan, I'd been a high school English teacher, passionate about literature, about sparking curiosity in my students. I'd had dreams of writing a novel, of traveling to places I'd only read about in books. But when Nathan's career demanded a move from our small hometown in Wisconsin to Chicago, I'd followed. I'd left my job, my friends, my family, convincing myself it was temporary, that I'd rebuild my life around his. After all, Nathan was everything I'd thought I wanted. Successful, charismatic, the kind of man who could command a room with a single glance. I'd been proud to be his wife, proud to stand in his orbit, but pride, I'd learned, could be a dangerous thing when it blinded you to the truth. Our 5th anniversary was supposed to be different. For weeks, I'd been telling myself this night would be a reset, a chance to reclaim the partnership I'd once believed we had. I'd spent hours getting ready, curling my dark hair into soft waves, applying makeup with a precision I rarely bothered with anymore. The sapphire dress felt like a talisman, a reminder of the woman I used to be. Deep down, I was planning a conversation, one I'd been rehearsing in my head for months. I wanted to talk about starting a family, about building a life that wasn't just an extension of Nathan's ambitions. I wanted him to see me, really see me, as an equal, not as the polished accessory he'd molded me into. La Lumière was Nathan's kind of place, sleek, expensive, the kind of restaurant where the menu was a single page of minimalist font, and the wine list cost more than most people's rent. The waitstaff moved with practiced grace, their voices hushed, their presence almost invisible. Nathan looked impeccable in his tailored charcoal suit, his cufflinks glinting under the soft light. His phone sat on the table, buzzing intermittently, with emails he couldn't ignore, even tonight. I watched the couples around us, their hands brushing, their laughter genuine, and felt a pang of envy. When had we last laughed like that? When had Nathan's smile felt like it was for me, not for an audience? The evening began as it always did. Nathan ordered for us both, steak for him, salmon for me, without asking what I wanted. I'd grown accustomed to this, the quiet erasure of my preferences. He launched into a monologue about his latest case, a high-stakes corporate merger that had him on the verge of partnership at the firm. I nodded, smiled, played my role in our well-rehearsed dance. But tonight something felt different. A restlessness stirred inside me, like a tide pulling back before a wave crashes. I could feel it building, a pressure I couldn't name, and I think Nathan sensed it too. His eyes kept darting to mine, searching for something he couldn't quite place. The wine arrived, poured with a flourish, and Nathan raised his glass. "To 5 more years," he said, his voice smooth but proprietary, like he was claiming ownership of our future. The words sent a chill down my spine, not a toast, but a declaration of control. That's when I spoke, my voice trembling but resolute. "Nathan, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we talked about starting a family." The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. His glass froze halfway to his lips, and the restaurant seemed to fade away, the clatter of silverware and hum of conversation replaced by a deafening silence between us. His eyes narrowed, that familiar look of disapproval settling over his face like a storm cloud. "Elise," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "We've been over this. You're not ready for that kind of responsibility. Not ready." As if he alone held the authority to decide what I could handle. As if my dreams, my desires, were irrelevant in the face of his vision for our life. Something inside me snapped, a thread I'd been holding together for years finally giving way. "We haven't been over it," I said, my voice steadier now, though my heart pounded. "You decided, and I went along with it. But I'm 33, Nathan. I know what I'm ready for." His face darkened, the charming mask he wore for the world slipping to reveal something colder, harder. "Don't you dare embarrass me in public," he hissed, leaning forward so close I could smell the bourbon on his breath. "You don't know what you're talking about. You can barely manage your own life, let alone a kid." The couple at the next table glanced over, their conversation pausing as they pretended not to listen. Heat flooded my cheeks, but it wasn't shame this time. It was fury, pure and blazing, a fire that had been smoldering for years. "My life?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You mean the life where I gave up my teaching career to move here for your job? Where I left my friends, my family, because it was better for you? That life I can't manage?" That's when it happened. His hand shot out, the slap reverberating through the restaurant like a thunderclap. My head snapped to the side, pain exploding across my cheek, my vision blurring for a moment. The room went deathly silent, every eye on us, the weight of their stares pressing down like a physical force. For 5 years, Nathan had controlled me with words, with expectations, with the slow, deliberate erosion of my confidence. But he'd never hit me, until now. I touched my cheek, the sting sharp and hot, and looked at Nathan. He stared at his hand, as if it belonged to someone else, a flicker of shock crossing his face. But then, the Nathan I knew returned. Smooth, calculated, the master of damage control. "Elise, I'm so sorry," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, reaching for my hand across the table. "I don't know what came over me. Work's been brutal, and I'm sorry. Please, let's not make a scene." It was a performance, and we both knew it. The restaurant was still watching, waiting for my response, their forks paused, their conversations hushed. My legs felt unsteady as I stood, murmuring an excuse about needing the restroom. I wove through the tables, past couples who avoided my gaze, their eyes darting away as if my pain was contagious. In the bathroom, I locked the door and faced the mirror. The red mark on my cheek was already darkening, a stark contrast against my pale skin, my carefully applied makeup smudged around my eyes. But it wasn't the physical mark that stopped me. It was the look in my own eyes. They weren't the eyes of the woman who'd walked into this restaurant, hoping to salvage her marriage. They were awake, alive, and burning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I pulled out my phone, my hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I snapped a photo of my reflection, the handprint vivid under the harsh fluorescent light. I created a new folder labeled Truth and saved the image there, a digital record of the moment my marriage revealed its true face. Standing there, in that sterile restaurant bathroom, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who'd walked in here was Nathan's wife, his understanding, accommodating partner. The woman staring back at me was someone else entirely. Someone who was done playing small. I splashed cold water on my face, careful not to disturb the mark on my cheek. I needed it there, a reminder of what I'd endured, of what I'd survived. I thought back to the early days of our marriage, when Nathan's charm had felt like a gift. He'd sweep me off my feet with grand gestures, weekend trips to Napa, surprise bouquets of roses, promises of a life filled with adventure. But those promises had come with strings, ones I hadn't seen until they were wrapped tightly around me. He'd convinced me to quit teaching, saying it was temporary, that I could go back once we were settled in Chicago. He'd isolated me from my friends, subtly discouraging my visits home, claiming his schedule was too demanding for me to be away. He'd taken control of our finances, insisting it was easier if he handled everything. And I'd let him, because I'd believed in the dream of us. But dreams, I was learning, could turn into cages. That slap hadn't just marked my face, it had shattered the illusion I'd been living under. I straightened my dress, took a deep breath, and returned to the table. Nathan was in full charm mode, laughing with the waiter, spinning a story about a misunderstanding. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, but not with remorse, with strategy. "Sweetheart," he said, standing to pull out my chair with exaggerated care. "I've explained everything to the staff. They understand it was just a marital spat." A marital spat, as if his hand had accidentally found my face. As if 5 years of slowly erasing me from my own life had been a simple miscommunication. I sat down, smiled, and played along, but inside, I was cataloging every detail. His assumption that I'd comply, his casual dismissal of what he'd done, the absence of any real regret. "Of course," I said, my voice calm, almost eerie in its steadiness. "These things happen." Nathan relaxed, his shoulders loosening as he assumed he'd won. He reached across the table to squeeze my hand, his touch now repulsive. "You know I love you, Elise," he said, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "I just want what's best for us, for our future." His version of us was clear, a future where he held all the power, where I remained the silent, supportive wife. But as he droned on about his plans, new cases, a bigger house, a vacation to Aspen, I was having a different conversation in my mind. I was remembering the small things I'd ignored, the way he distanced me from my best friend, Sarah, with subtle comments about her bad influence, the way he'd convinced me to sell my car, saying we only needed one, the way he'd laugh off my suggestions about our finances, calling me cute for worrying about things I didn't understand. The drive home was silent, the city lights blurring past my window. Nathan probably thought he'd contained the crisis, that I'd fall back into line as I always had. But as I stared out at the Chicago skyline, my mind was clearer than it had been in years. That slap had burned away the fog of self-doubt I'd been living in, the constant questioning of my own instincts. That night, as Nathan slept soundly beside me, his breathing steady and untroubled, I lay awake, my mind racing. I wasn't just planning my escape, I was planning something far more deliberate, something that would hit Nathan where it hurt most. His greatest fear wasn't losing me. It was losing his reputation, the carefully crafted image of the perfect lawyer, the perfect husband. the perfect man. And after 5 years of studying him, I knew exactly how to dismantle it. The next 3 weeks were a study in discipline. I moved through our life like a ghost, smiling at Nathan's jokes, cooking his favorite meals, roasted chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes with garlic, playing the role of the perfect wife while my plan took shape in the shadows. I became a detective in my own marriage, gathering evidence of the truth Nathan had worked so hard to bury. It started small, a bruise on my arm from a private discussion about my spending habits, photographed in the early morning light while Nathan was in the shower. I found bank statements in his office, accounts in his name only, with sums of money I'd never known existed. I screenshot them, saving them to my truth folder, a digital vault of his secrets. I began recording his late-night rants when he'd pace the living room with a glass of bourbon, venting about work, about colleagues he despised, about me. "Elise doesn't get it," he'd mutter, thinking I was asleep. "She's too soft, too weak for this world." His words, once wounding, now fueled my resolve. I hid a small recorder in the bookshelf, capturing his outbursts, his contempt, his casual cruelty. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building, not just for a divorce, but for something more satisfying. A reckoning. Nathan didn't notice the change in me. He was too busy with his cases, his networking, his endless pursuit of partnership at Caldwell and Pierce. He'd come home late, smelling of expensive cologne and stress, and I'd greet him with a smile, a glass of wine, a question about his day. He'd talk, oblivious to the fact that I was studying him, learning his weaknesses, memorizing the cracks in his armor. His greatest vulnerability was his pride, his need to be seen as flawless. The firm's annual gala was approaching, a black tie event at the Drake Hotel where Nathan was set to receive an award for a high-profile case. It was the perfect stage for what I had in mind. I prepared meticulously. I bought a new dress, a sleek black number that hugged my curves and felt like armor, not the sapphire one Nathan had chosen to make me his trophy. I practiced my speech, in front of the bathroom mirror, refining every word, every pause, every inflection. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about reclaiming the voice he'd tried to silence, about showing him that the woman he'd underestimated was more powerful than he'd ever imagined. I spent hours researching divorce lawyers, quietly meeting with one during a shopping trip Nathan didn't question. I opened a new bank account, one he didn't know about, and began transferring small amounts from our joint savings, money he wouldn't miss, but enough to give me a safety net. I also started reconnecting with the parts of myself I'd lost. I called Sarah, my best friend from college, who'd moved to Milwaukee after Nathan had subtly pushed her out of my life. "Elise, where have you been?" she asked, her voice warm but laced with concern. I told her everything, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. She listened, didn't judge, and promised to be there when I was ready to leave. I began journaling again, something I hadn't done since before we moved to Chicago. The pages, filled with my thoughts, my anger, my plans, a map of the woman I was becoming. The night before the gala, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with anticipation. Nathan slept beside me, unaware that the woman next to him was no longer his wife, but a stranger with a purpose. I thought about my parents, who lived 3 hours away in Wisconsin, and how I'd stopped visiting them because Nathan always had. An excuse, a case, a meeting, a reason I couldn't go. I thought about my students, the ones I'd loved teaching, their eager faces as we discussed To Kill a Mockingbird or The Great Gatsby. I'd given up so much for Nathan, but I was done sacrificing myself. Tomorrow, at the gala, I would take back my life. The Drake Hotel's grand ballroom was a vision of opulence, its crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light across the polished marble floor. The firm's annual gala was the event of the year. For Caldwell and Pierce, a showcase of power and prestige attended by partners, clients, and Chicago's elite. I walked in on Nathan's arm, my black dress a stark contrast to the sapphire one I'd worn on our anniversary. Heads turned as we entered, and I felt Nathan's grip tighten, not out of affection, but possession. I was his trophy, after all, the beautiful wife who never made waves. The room was a sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition. Nathan was in his element, shaking hands, flashing his $1,000,000 smile, working the crowd with the ease of a man who believed he was untouchable. "There's my wife," he said to a group of senior partners, pulling me close. "Elise has been my rock through this merger case." I smiled, nodded, played the part one last time, but my mind was elsewhere, calculating, waiting for the moment I'd chosen. Dinner was a blur of small talk and clinking glasses. I sat beside Nathan, sipping my wine, my heart steady despite the stakes. He was oblivious to the shift in me, too busy charming the table with stories of his latest courtroom victory. I watched him, memorizing the way he tilted his head when he laughed, the way his eyes scanned the room for approval. He was scheduled to speak after dinner, accepting an award for his role in the merger case. That's when I'd make my move. As dessert was served, chocolate mousse with a raspberry coulis, Nathan leaned over, his breath warm against my ear. "You look stunning tonight," he whispered, his voice carrying that practiced charm. "I'm lucky to have you." I smiled, but inside I was steel. His words no longer had power over me. I thought about the truth folder on my phone, now brimming with evidence, photos of bruises, screenshots of hidden accounts, recordings of his rants. I thought about the lawyer I'd hired, the bank account I'd opened, the life I was building without him. When the time came for Nathan's speech, he took the stage with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the world. He spoke about teamwork, integrity, the values that had earned him this award. He even mentioned me, his supportive wife, with a smile that made my skin crawl. "To partnerships," he concluded, raising his glass. "To my colleagues, my mentors, and especially to Elise, who shows me every day what true partnership means." The room erupted in applause, and Nathan's eyes found mine, expecting gratitude, devotion. Instead, I stood, my glass raised, and walked toward the stage. "Thank you, Nathan," I said, my voice clear and steady as I reached the podium. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. "I'd like to say a few words about partnership, if I may." Nathan's smile flickered, a crack in his perfect facade, but he handed me the microphone, probably thinking I'd deliver a sweet, supportive speech that would make him look even better. Poor Nathan. He really should have paid more attention to who I was becoming. I faced the crowd, my heart pounding but my voice calm. Nathan's right. Partnership is everything. It's about respect, trust, and lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. I paused, letting my words settle, letting the room feel the weight of what was coming. "So, I want to share a story about what Nathan taught me about respect 3 weeks ago, on our 5th anniversary." The air grew thick with anticipation, every guest leaning forward, sensing a shift. Nathan's face tightened, but he couldn't stop me without confirming my words. We were at La Lumiere, a beautiful restaurant, discussing our future. Specifically, my desire to start a family. Nathan felt I wasn't ready. When I disagreed, he showed me what respect looks like in our marriage. I held up my phone, the photo of my bruised cheek glowing on the screen, the handprint stark and undeniable. This is what happened when I dared to have an opinion. A collective gasp rippled through the room, a wave of shock that seemed to suck the air out of the space. Nathan's face drained of color, his eyes wide with panic. But I wasn't done. "Nathan didn't just teach me about respect," I continued, pulling out a folder of documents I'd tucked into my clutch. He taught me about partnership in other ways. For years, he's hidden money in accounts I wasn't allowed to access, planning his future while I planned ours. I held up a bank statement, the numbers clear even from a distance. This is just one of many. Nathan finally found his voice, his tone desperate, cracking under the weight of his unraveling image. "Elise, stop this," he snapped, stepping toward me. "You're making a scene. You're not well." "Am I?" I said, turning to him with a smile that felt like a blade. "Or am I finally telling the truth you've worked so hard to hide?" I faced the crowd again, my voice steady, unwavering. "I've filed for divorce. I have evidence of everything, bruises, accounts, his words when he thought no one was listening. And Nathan," I said, looking directly at him for the first time, "I'm keeping the sapphire dress." The room erupted, a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and the rustle of phones being pulled out to record the moment. Nathan lunged toward me, his face twisted with rage. But two senior partners, Mr. Pierce and Ms. Callahan, stepped in, their expressions grim. "That's enough, Nathan," Mr. Pierce said sharply, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You need to leave." Security appeared, their presence calm but firm, escorting a red-faced, sputtering Nathan from the room. I set the microphone down, my hand steady, and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted, their whispers following me. Not the pitying murmurs I'd grown used to, but something new. Respect, awe, maybe even fear. I didn't look back. 6 months later, I sat in my new apartment, a cozy one-bedroom in Lincoln Park with a view of the lake, bought with the divorce settlement. The sapphire dress hung in my closet, a relic of the woman I'd been, and a reminder of the woman I was becoming. The settlement had been generous, thanks to the evidence I'd gathered and the lawyer who'd fought for me. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the freedom to rebuild my life on my terms. I'd gone back to teaching, taking a position at a local high school where I taught literature to juniors and seniors. My classroom was a sanctuary, filled with the energy of young minds grappling with pride and prejudice, or the catcher in the rye. I'd reconnected with Sarah, who'd driven down from Milwaukee to help me move in, her laughter filling the apartment as we unpacked boxes and shared wine. I'd started therapy, unpacking the years I'd lost to Nathan's control, learning to trust my own instincts again. One evening, as I sipped coffee on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of pink and gold, my phone buzzed with Nathan's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Elise," he said, his voice softer, smaller, stripped of its usual arrogance. "I've been thinking. Maybe we could try again. I've changed." I hung up without a word, a smile tugging at my lips. Some lessons only need to be learned once. Nathan's downfall hadn't just been the loss of his award that night. He'd been passed over for partnership, his reputation at the firm shattered by whispers of his true character. Colleagues who'd once fawned over him now avoided his gaze, and clients had started requesting other attorneys. My victory wasn't in his loss, but in my liberation. As I sat in my apartment, surrounded by books and the soft hum of a life I'd built for myself, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The woman who'd walked into La Lumiere on our 5th anniversary was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who refused to stay small. I'd started writing again, not just journaling, but a novel, a story about a woman who finds her voice in the ruins of her past. I'd joined a book club, made new friends, planned a trip to Paris, something I'd dreamed of since college but never pursued because Nathan had deemed it impractical. The sapphire dress still hung in my closet, a symbol of the journey I'd taken. I didn't wear it often, but sometimes I'd run my fingers over its fabric, remembering the woman who'd worn it, hoping for a miracle that never came. That woman was part of me, but she no longer defined me. I was Elise Harper, teacher, writer, survivor, and I was enough. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when you thought you had none. You're stronger than you know, and sometimes the best revenge is living unapologetically as yourself.